Today's guest is someone who brings both heart and expertise to a topic that is often misunderstood and emotionally charged: hoarding. Cecilia C.C. Garrett is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in treating hoarding disorder, anxiety, and trauma. Now, what makes CC's voice so powerful is that her passion isn't just professional, it's also personal. She's worked directly with individuals and family who are impacted by hoarding, as well as with agencies and communities that are navigating this complex issue. Through her private practice, Lightening the Load Counseling, located in Washington State, CC helps people move forward with compassion and dignity. Her mission? To destigmatize hoarding disorder by educating families, professionals, and the public about the critical role of mental health treatment. CC, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're honored to have you join us for just a candid and insightful conversation on things to consider before choosing to help a hoarding parent or not. So my first question is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about hoarding disorder, especially when it involves a parent or older loved one?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that we can go in a weekend, a week, take out a lot of the accumulation. Sometimes that includes trash. Sometimes that means there's pests, and that we can actually have a long-term positive impact. And unfortunately, what we're finding more and more in the research is that actually what's underlying the issue is actually some really significant mental health things, such as emotional dysregulation. So people who can't manage their own emotions and then are turning to dopamine high from new acquisition and churning, taking care of their things, and then these attachments to their possessions. And we all need attachments, healthy, secure attachments. And if we don't get it from another person, just like we give our kids a teddy bear when we leave them at daycare for the first time, or we put them in the crib away from the bedside bassinet, if they don't have that object, that's where they turn. If they don't have a secure attachment to the caregiver, their spouse, their family members, their friends, they turn to their things. And so getting rid of the things without addressing that underlying trauma, emotional dysregulation, and helping them build more secure attachments to people and be able to accept and lean into social supports, it's always going to be a short-term fix. And it's actually probably going to further damage their ability to trust others, increase their emotional dysregulation. And let's be really clear, if we go in without their permission, even if they're our parents, it's theft. And it's one of the very few disorders. It still baffles me. And to be clear, I had a parent who had hoarding disorder, and I did try to do these surprise clean outs when I was a teenager, trying to clean it up while she's at work. And, any other disorder, if my son came to my house today and took out a quarter of my possessions without my knowledge, that's theft, right? And we have this stigma that somehow because somebody has these high clutter hoarding behaviors, that somehow that then justifies these really big clean outs that are very, very short-term effective, if ever really effective, because of what they do to the individual.
Wow, I'm glad you let me know that it's considered theft, because I think as an adult child, when I had my parents, is you don't think about that. You just think about helping them get rid of stuff. I did not realize that could probably be considered a crime.
And I will say, in the group of adult children, there's a bunch of different terms: adult children of hoarders, survivors of parental hoarding. There's a lot of different terms, but you will, in these, if you have access to them, these forums, hear people whose parents have in fact called the cops on them, and law enforcement shows up. Now, to be fair, law enforcement generally goes, "Oh, this is bordering on domestic violence, right? This isn't necessarily theft." But the definition of theft is entering someone's home without permission and removing things, right? it doesn't say, hey, oh, it's Cece, that's Judy's daughter. That was my mom's name. It doesn't say, oh, well, that's okay. That's not theft.
Yeah, it
No,
doesn't help
really,
with
that definition is theft.
theft. Yeah, it doesn't help with the trust between parents and
No,
adult child
no.
either. So, how do you know when it's truly hoarding or just stuff that's accumulating over the years?
That's a really great question. I think we know as a professional, I know it's hoarding when somebody then tells me that they can't get rid of the things that it causes too much anxiety, or it's, and sometimes they don't even say anxiety. They have such a high sensitivity towards anxiety that they don't even entertain the idea of anxiety, but it's too distressing. They say things like, well, I don't want to get rid of it because it's still useful, or I don't want to get rid of it because somebody else might be able to use it. I don't want to get rid of it because that napkin was on the table at Ruth Chris Steakhouse when I met your father, right? Like, I mean, it's just like, it seems really random to me. But when they have these very complex stories around why they need to save the items, and or they simply avoid the process because they feel like it's going to be difficult, and then we get that really high level of clutter. It's impacting the quality of life, right? They're having distress. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily always looking for help, but there's some level of distress that if you can pull back, and that's hard as a child or a family member to pull back and just watch them, but you're going to notice them kind of muttering to themselves, where is that? Where is that? Right? That's distress, right? It doesn't have to be, my world is falling apart, but that a lot of people who come for help say, my things have taken over my life. I like my things, but I also feel like I'm a slave to them. They're impacting my ability to live the way I want to live. And that's actually where we really want someone when they turn for help, is to recognize that there's some things they really want or need to do they can't, because that's where we can start building motivation and sneaking in some of these safety and health concerns that families are really, really appropriately concerned about. Mom's using a walker, but she doesn't have a path in her house wide enough for the walker. So now she's doing this weird touching thing and falling 2 or 3 times a week. And we're really afraid now she's going to break a hip. That's a very valid concern.
Yeah.
So then we want to really see if we can find where mom's having some distress, things she really wants to do that she's not able to do, and work with her on those. And then we sneak in those health and safety pieces as we do
So,
that.
how do you? Okay, so my mom was a hoarder. She slept with
You're in good company, me too.
she never worked, but she was a housewife. So she slept with QVC on. So she'd wake up in the middle of the night and just order stuff. But she was a neat hoarder. Like I knew she had a lot of stuff, but I didn't know really into depth when I started opening closets here, a chest here, going through the old suitcases, and stuff was stored everywhere. What do you do in that situation if it's neatly put away? Do you just, it's theirs and they don't want to get rid of it? There's nothing you can do?
I mean, again, we look at when, even when there's not a health and safety risk at the same level. So maybe we're not squalor, which great. We don't want people living in squalor, right? We can still kind of lean into like, hey, mom, I noticed you have a bunch of stuff here, and finding again what they're looking to do, what they miss, what they're wanting to do. And then we see, okay, inviting them into the solution. It's really easy for us to think we have a good solution and to do the work. But in fact, just like a caterpillar emerging from the chrysalis, if something else, some other force releases the caterpillar from the oh, having a moment, brain fog. Women over 40, right? But from the chrysalis, in fact, they need the striving, fighting to strengthen their wings and get the fluid out of their lungs. And to some extent, that's true with our parents. Even when it's clean, as we age, there is a decline. I'm almost 50, and gosh, it's scary. The things that I'm like, oh, I used to be able to do that, and that's really challenging now. I can only imagine in 20 years as my capacity, my physical capacity, my mental capacity has declined even more, as my children are adults with their own children, less family support, possibly also in retirement. I know you said your mom had been a homemaker, but homemakers don't always have really strong social supports because they're able to be at home.
Yeah.
But as we age, we really need those things. So it's finding still, is there some way that we can start this process?
Mm.
The hard part is, and I'm just going to say, having a hoarding parent myself, is I think we look at the volume and we go, this really ugly, hard thing is we start watching either our parents pass away or our friends' parents pass away. And that issue of mortality becomes real. And then we look at the stuff and we're like, oh my goodness, this is going to be my life. My mom's going to die and I'm going to have to deal with all of this.
Yes.
And to be clear, grief messes with your brain. You're not going to make great decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think engaging with just these small conversations and recognizing also, depending on your relationship and your choices, you don't have to be responsible for cleaning out a parent's home after they've passed.
Mm-hmm.
There's even in states, there are some states that still have what they call filial law. Filial law does not apply to cleaning out the property of somebody who's passed.
Mm-hmm.
It's about providing long-term care as they age. Who says we have to do that? There's companies that we can hire, right? And so really we get very focused on our own needs, and that's not wrong, right? When we're making a decision whether to help or not, we do need to consider our needs. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we do that, I think, at the forgetting that our parents have needs. And not that I believe that anybody's trying to be, mean or forceful, but I think, we will, I don't know about you, I want my needs met, right? It's a very adult decision each morning to be like, oh, well, it might be really helpful to take care of some other people's needs in that process because that's going to get my needs met too.
So that might be a conversation, I think, for siblings to have if a parent or parents won't start the process of cleaning out things, getting rid of things so there aren't a lot of items left in the event of a death, one parent or both parents. Are they going to pay for a company? Who's going to be responsible for that? I'm an only child, so I was fortunate being self-employed. I actually stayed with my dad for about 2 months. And I tell you, most of that time was getting rid of her stuff, just shipping it out to friends and family, who might want it, taking it to the thrift store. And I even had a yard sale, but they lived in a small town. So I feel like it made it a lot more difficult. If we were in a bigger city, I could have just taken, I think, loads of stuff to a
Goodwill.
thrift store.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to drive 45 minutes away to get to the bigger thrift store. So how do you think that a parent is, because sometimes it's hard just to get them to do the will and all that stuff and the power of attorney. So introducing the subject of all your stuff, if we could start eliminating, it would be easier on the brothers and our brothers and sisters. How do you think they would be open to that or no?
I'm going to just tell you, it just depends on the family dynamic, because just like hoarding occurs across the spectrum, we have like your mom who had lots of things, but very clean. My mom was on the other end, a lot of things, very dirty, squalid, right? So those experiences and then the family dynamics occur across the spectrum. And so I want to be really clear. It's a personal choice and a family decision whether to intervene and how to intervene. The other part of that is the conversation. There needs to be some awareness, especially in a sibling group. Who has the best luck communicating with mom or dad, right? Who is the one that mom favors? It's not in the research because, again, I think there's these spectrums and these different presentations, but some narcissism sometimes in parents who have hoarding behaviors. And in siblings, that usually means that there's one favored child, but there's also one or more who are unfavored. So if an unfavored child is trying to have this conversation, this isn't going to happen. The favored child is probably going to have better luck. The other part is really not focusing on the stuff. And I again, like, it's so counterintuitive when the problem is the level of clutter, right?
Mhm.
But in fact, what we really want to focus on is quality of life. We want to talk about mom being stressed out, dad being, getting really upset when he can't find things. Oh, could we help sort and organize some things, right? Not really talking so much about necessarily trying to get rid of the things, but really focusing on how could their quality of life be better? And in that, when they say, "Oh, I'd really love to be able to paint again. I haven't been able to paint in 20 years." Okay, well, I'd love to help create that space for you. I'm just concerned we might have to rearrange, move some things out to make that possible. And just, leaving it, not forcing it. Well, I really want to paint. Okay, well, how are you going to do that with all these things here? Pointing out discrepancies. This is actually part of motivational interviewing, which is a clinical skill. But families can learn this. Ask open-ended questions. Affirm what you hear your loved ones saying. Restate it. Be supportive. Like there's these really, great conversational skills that we can use to soften these conversations.
Okay. So, can you explain the emotional toll of helping a hoarding parent, how that can affect them, and whether I guess they can you can decide if you're even equipped to step in, or is that where someone with your expertise who comes in to help a family in that regard?
Well, so how to know if you're have the bandwidth? I think, the workbook that I created really does take into consideration all of the things that I experienced when I had to make a decision, but I didn't have a guide. I just was hitting these things and making decisions. And I don't try not to have regrets, but I think that there are some decisions that, looking back, if I'd had more information, I would have made different decisions. One of the things is what is in your life, what is what are your responsibilities? What is your health like? What is your mental health like? I had kids, small kids, still at home. We left my less than 2 year old kiddo with a aunt and uncle while we went across the country back and forth to take care of my mother and her home. That's a big toll to put on a family. Considering that, considering finances, if going out back and forth across the country is going to end up putting you on a path to financial ruin, maybe that's not a good decision for you. Do you have allergies, right? A lot of people who've grown up in hoarding, even clean, there's a difficulty vacuuming and dusting. So they're more prone to asthma and allergies. We have a lot of respiratory issues in these adult children. So consider that, and if you're going to, you need to make considerations about, do I need to wear a mask, right? Yeah, mom and dad live here, but they also live here and their lungs have gotten used to this. My lungs are no longer used to it, right? So really taking into consideration all these things and being aware that there are going to be some things that we might get surprised by, structural damage, that as a therapist, as a coach, as a nurse, whatever your job, you're not necessarily qualified to remotely address or evaluate. When we get into higher level, the weight of things takes its toll. Even if it's a clean environment, too many things make floors weak, shifts the structure. And we have to know those things and take that into consideration when we make our decisions.
Okay. And what role does therapy or mental health treatment play in long-term recovery, and how can family members encourage that without pushing too hard or causing shame within their parents?
It's a great question. I think, because the underlying pieces of the reasons things came into the home and the reasons things are staying in the home are emotional, psychological, that then we just really push into. I know this seems like it's going to be really hard, hearing our parents, our loved ones, when they say they're afraid or they don't want to do it. When somebody says they don't want to do that, don't necessarily conclude that they're being difficult. Our nervous systems, when they get overwhelmed, and high volumes of clutter is a dysregulating scenario. I could walk into any home today with amazing self-regulation skills, but if it's high volume, I'm going to need more mental bandwidth to self-regulate and then to have to co-regulate the other person as well. I mean, it just takes an enormous amount of energy. So we really need to look at it as, you know, there, I wonder if there's some things that are just really hard for you, and it's not appropriate for you to have that conversation with me, right? Would it be helpful maybe to meet with somebody who could help you walk through this, who understands how hard it is to let go of things? And again, I always love to remind people, we don't have to talk about hoarding or hoarding disorder until we're in the counseling space and we're billing insurance. I don't need to diagnose anybody with hoarding disorder until I need to put a code onto an insurance claim. The rest of the time, we can talk about high clutter. We can talk about seeking. We all have this drive to seek new things. It's how we've survived for eons, right? When we were nomadic people, if we weren't looking for berries and animals to hunt and their skins to save, right? Because that's winter wear. These are really not abnormal behaviors. They've just gone too far for the folks who have hoarding disorder. So we just talk about, you're really creative. You'd like to get new things. It's hard to let go of. We don't have to get into that big dirty hoarding word again until we're really leaning into specialized treatment.
Okay. So you just hit on a duh moment for me, like duh. You mentioned insurance. So obviously hoarding is acknowledged by insurance agencies as a
Yeah.
mental health issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm an insurance billing practice, and all but one of my all but one of my clients is utilizing insurance, and it's absolutely billable. For those who are therapists who might stumble upon this and they're like, "Oh, I think somebody that I'm working with might actually have a hoarding issue," right? Well, it looks a little different. We want to lean into, talking about when we're billing insurance, medical necessity. Well, what does that look like? Well, that's the impact on their life. So they're having trouble navigating their home. There's high risk of fire. This is causing distress because there's a high risk of fire and fall. We look at things like lack of social support. They're not able to have people in. Social isolation is a very common side effect of having hoarding behaviors. And so we would look at that. We talk about if there's, you mentioned your dad and your mom. If there's a relationship and it's causing strain in the relationship, we document that as part of medical necessity. It's causing inter and intrapersonal conflict, distress. Like this is a regular conversation in this household. There's too much stuff. Get rid of your stuff. There's too much stuff, which means we're fighting, right? Which creates anxiety for both people. And so we can really lean into medical necessity and lean into this inability to trust others to help, which also leads to that need for medical necessity, why we need to do therapy.
Yeah, I know someone whose parent has a major hoarding issue, one of the parents, and all they did was shifted everything into the basement because
Mhm.
nobody goes down there. And I remember thinking, I wonder if that's a smart thing to do. I don't know, but I think they just needed to do something. And
Yeah. So and one of the things that we'll do when someone's not ready to actually make big decisions and let things go, we do something called harm reduction. A lot of people have heard of harm reduction because it's kind of this idea during the HIV pandemic where we started providing clean needles, and same thing with heroin users. Like, we can't necessarily make somebody ready to do the hard work of, getting clean from substance use, or, all of these things, making condoms available easily for people who are, having sex. These are harm reduction strategies. So how does that fit into hoarding? Well, so in a harm reduction strategy, we're not really looking at trying to significantly decrease the clutter. We're really looking at trying to organize and strategically make it less of a barrier. So, that might be boxing things in categories, and leaning into, well, is this something that says, oh no, that's definitely trash. Great, and so we're getting rid of the things that they identify are in fact no longer of use. And even those who want to save everything will usually acknowledge there's some things that they can let go of. So then we just get my clients tend to call this the low hanging fruit, right? I can pick up 3 things to toss, 3 things to donate, 3 things to recycle every day of the week in my house without any problems. And that's where we start, is that really low hanging fruit. Three, I call it the rule of threes. So no matter how bad you're feeling, a lot of complex medical issues going along with this as well. So we start with that, and we don't necessarily, I'm very much an advocate against the use of storage units.
Mm.
But sometimes what we do is box and organize to
Mhm.
reduce, because they're mentally too fragile. They're physically too fragile to maybe engage with long-term therapy. And to be clear, work on hoarding disorder tends to be a long-term therapy. I tell clients up front, it's going to be 18 to 24 months kind of minimum. A lot of my clients are with me longer. They're making progress.
Mhm.
And that's great. That's where we have to lean into that medical necessity, right? We're in billing insurance. Got to make sure insurance knows we're making progress, but there's still distress,
Yeah.
and that we're doing something helpful. So the idea of just moving into the basement, it depends on the issue and the scenario. Sometimes that will make sense,
Mm.
but again, coming back to something we mentioned earlier, it does just put it off for the family members. And so I think there's also this potential the family members could benefit from counseling.
Mm.
Uh, this anticipated grief. Someday, I don't know if you've seen, there's a little, it kind of reminds me like the New York Times, it's a little sketch, and it's an elder gentleman on a walker with his son, and they're standing in front of a storage unit with the door open and the boxes, and it says, "Someday, son, all this will be yours." And I mean, this is the fear of these families, is someday all of this is going to be mine to deal with, right? And they don't want the things, right?
Mm.
Even if you don't have a parent who hoards, a lot of us as we age are looking at our parents' homes and going, "Ugh, I
Mhm.
don't want to deal with all of this,"
Yeah.
right? I mean, I love this Swedish art of death cleaning, right? It doesn't work really well for people who have hoarding behaviors. They really need mental health support around it. But for family members, sometimes our family members' issues, their unwillingness to see and accept help, really ends up impacting our mental health. And that's the one place we have power. I
Mm.
can't make mom decide she wants to get rid of these things or that she wants to start therapy. But man, it's freaking me out. I'm not sleeping every night because I'm wondering if this is the night when I get the call that something bad's happened.
Mhm.
Well, now it's impacting my quality of life. I have anxiety. I'm having depressive symptoms. I'm not sleeping. Maybe I should get counseling.
Mm. Okay. Interesting. Okay, CC, how can a potential client reach you? And I think you have a free giveaway as well. And anything else you want to share about how you do business for your clients, please share.
Yeah, so like I said, as you said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Washington. I do telehealth, so I do serve the entire state of Washington. In fact, I think as long as you were in your office in Washington, so because we have several cities on the border, so if you lived in one of those other states, but you physically are in the office at work within the state, you could be a client, right? Licensure board, important. Telehealth is my primary. I do offer help in person in central Washington, so Moses Lake area, which most of your listeners are going to be like, I have no idea what that is, but the people who need to know, they're going to know. I do have, it's called Parents Who Hoard, Things to Consider Before Choosing to Help or to Not. It's a workbook. It's free download. You can go to my website, which is Lightning, Lighthen. We're making that load lighter, lighteningtheloadcounseling.com. And then I also have a non-clinical page, and you'll have to drop it in the box because I can't remember it off the top, but I have a page for non-clinical support. So these are going to be small groups. I do SOFME, Survivors of Parental Hoarding and Mental Illness, meets
Okay.
once a month. Actually meeting this Saturday. Well, once a month. I'm not sure how it times. But there's also Ask Me Anything. You can submit a question through that ask me anything about hoarding, and I will respond via a short video, and then I post that to my YouTube. So I do have a YouTube channel. You can find me there, LinkedIn, and yeah, that's
And
kind of the big places.
any of those links I don't have, please send those to me, CC, because what I'll do, just for the audience, I'll share in the description box below this show. That way they can go directly to I'll share those links. And then also, because I know you said primarily Washington before I let you go, for those who are out of state, can they attend your online group? And
Yes.
also, if they want to see someone in person, what should they look for for someone who does your type of work, where they're located?
Yeah, so as far as the support group for adult children, the SOFME, yes, you can do that across. I do that as a peer. Again, I have lived experience, and so that is not a clinical, it's a support group. And so anybody, actually, it's been international. We've had people from as far away as, I think it was Hungary, participate. So yes, across state lines, family members can do that. I also offer family consultation to families who are either pre-planning or maybe the crisis has struck and they're just trying to navigate. And that also is available to anyone outside of Washington included. I forget your other question there.
What to look for if they want
Oh,
someone to meet in person where they are located?
yeah. So here's the interesting thing. As little as we know about hoarding, there's a lot less training for people to understand what it's like to be a family member. That said, I think if you found somebody who has either a trauma background or even a substance use disorder background, where they've done family groups with substance abuse, they're going to understand the impact of the person, in the family who isn't seeing the problem and isn't working on the problem. Here's the really hard part. A lot of adult children say, I found a great therapist, but I'm really struggling because I'm having to teach them about hoarding. It's a really hard thing, and it's a personal choice to engage with that. Not a lot of people really get it. It's one of the things I'm trying to do as I train therapists is training them not only to treat hoarding disorder, but to understand what it's like to be a family member, even when we've left the home, the impacts on the relationships and what it means for our system, and how to work with that. So trauma-informed therapists who work with trauma, and also those who have the experience of working with substance abuse, because the impacts, families of alcoholics have similar impacts. So while it might seem like weird, and there's going to be parts where a family member may feel like they're teaching their therapist about hoarding, those people are going to understand systemically the impacts, even if they don't understand hoarding itself. The other place, if you're looking for a hoarding therapist, the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation, if you go to their website, which is iocdf.org, and on the first page, it has a square that says Find Help. You can look there, and while they're an OCD foundation, there are quite a few who I'm listed there, do treat hoarding disorder. And when you get to the second page, you can select hoarding disorder, not OCD. And that's also going to be a place to potentially find somebody who gets hoarding a little bit more, and could be a good resource for finding somebody.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. This was extremely informative and much needed because I think hoarding is actually on the increase, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems that way for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. And ladies, I hope you got a wealth of information. This was an awesome interview. Thank you.